Terri.
Hey, Susie. Good to see you.
Oh, it's lovely to see you. So thank you so much for joining me for Wellness Unwrapped. I'm so excited to chat to you today.
Thanks for the invitation.
So you are currently in Switzerland, are you not?
Yes,
Where you live?
I am.
Yeah.
Currently in Switzerland, and according to the reports, not bound to go anywhere else anytime soon.
Oh, I know. But it's so great that we can connect on Zoom. And last time I spoke to you, you were actually on a little solo holiday, were you not?
Right. That's
And
right.
I was so impressed with that because when I saw where you were staying, it was a beautiful view of the mountains. And I expected you to say that your kids were just in the next room or something like that. And they weren't, were they?
They weren't.
Because they were at home. And I was so impressed. I thought, I've got to have this woman on my podcast because a lot of us mums really struggle with the mum guilt and feel like we're a bit overwhelmed, but you actually took yourself off on a solo holiday. So can you start by telling us what was the thinking behind that?
Okay, so let's dive into the truth behind the solo holiday. Yeah. So I kind of called it a solo retreat week, right? And I was away Monday to Friday on my own. I booked myself a wellness hotel, small one, but had just enough wellness and privacy and a view of the mountains. I'm not big on heights, so I had no need to go on top of the mountain, but I just wanted to see the mountains, right? I find them inspiring from afar. That's kind of how I enjoy them. So I found myself the perfect location, right? And this stemmed from probably what is more important from the story than where I ended up, which is how I got there, which is, I would say, several months of not recognizing that I had not been listening into what I needed. And I had, this was, when you and I chatted and I was on that solo retreat week, it was October, and September, I had a kind of a complete meltdown, an emotional meltdown, where I recognized that I wasn't doing okay. And the truth is I had missed the signs of that not okayness all summer. All summer it was building. I'm not, you can't put an exact science on that, but it came to a head in September. Where
what was the thing that prompted you to realize that you weren't okay?
I cracked, just a meltdown of just overwhelming emotion, a lot of tears, a lot of, hard conversations with my husband, a lot of heart-to-heart conversations with my good friends, and really saying I don't know what I'm doing. Why am I doing this? Sort of the purpose was all getting called into question. All the choices I had ever made in my life were getting called into question. Big questions came up. And then I realized, wow, what's triggering this? I think when I stopped to look into it was that normally I have a big reset during the summer. I go home to the US where I'm originally from. I see family. I'm by the ocean. For me, I know ocean is my balm. It's my calm balm. Right?
We call it the sea here, but I miss the sea when I don't see it for a long time. And I was the same in lockdown. I started to dream about the sea because I missed it so much.
Right. It comes back to you, right? Your body calls for it, or something in you calls for what brings you that calm. And I have had it year after year after year. When I go home to see family, we always meet by the ocean. We're always at the beach for the summer. It's a time where I'm resetting by seeing family. I'm resetting by slowing down from work, and I'm resetting by being near the ocean. And this year, because of COVID, none of that happened. So I missed family. I missed stepping away from work. I missed the ocean. And instead, what we did was we made the best of it. We made the best of it by going to, on a camping excursion around Switzerland, which, look, nobody can, shake a stick at. That was amazing. But I spent the summer, driving in, on, through, up and around mountains.
Yeah.
And as I said, me in heights, like that's not calming for me. And so there were many moments of just intense having to face fears of heights and and being in the mountains where it's beautiful, but I get a little bit of a claustrophobic, like they're looming over me, kind of they're vast and majestic, which is the beauty, but they can feel intimidating to me. They don't bring me I need open space, vista, calm. My husband doesn't. He really gets calm and connection with nature from the mountains. So that was, and you have to just know what works for you. And I think I didn't realize how much all those things over the summer normally feed my soul.
Yeah.
And I was so busy trying to be okay, make it through. I think that we did that during COVID. Like we kind of like, suck it up. We can do it. We can do hard things. We're, cheering ourselves on. And I was so busy being busy and being okay. And in fact, in part, being okay by keeping myself busy. It's my numbing agent of choice that I didn't see the signs. And I think that's the big part of the message here is that I had this breakdown in September after having ignored the signs of what I needed, or even I didn't stop to ask myself what I needed. And so I had the breakdown. And meanwhile, my husband had already taken 2 separate weeks away to the mountains. He had already done 2 solo
with
retreats.
Friends?
No.
Or...
His solo retreats. Like
by himself.
By himself, self-care. He's usually got business trips. They were off this year. So he's like, I just need time and space away. I need to do some concentrated thinking. I need to do some focus work. Like he recognized what he needed. He asked for it. I said, no problem. Of course, that makes good sense. Go do it twice before I ever thought maybe I need that.
Wow. That just makes me smile because it rings so true with when I think about me and my girlfriends and their husbands. It's always the guy that kind of goes off and I don't mean to be disrespectful, but it generally is the guy that goes off and does what feels right for him. Whereas, the woman of the house, somehow it's not even an option, which I think the reason is that's why it struck me so deeply to see you in that beautiful hotel room with the view of the mountains and realize that you had taken yourself off there by yourself. And how did you find that week retreat? Did you come back a different person?
Yeah, it was amazing, right? And there was so much that a week like that will give you. Now, I have to admit, it takes some scheduling, right? And even my husband's week away took some scheduling. He's like, is this a good week to step out? And typical, me fashion, I said, oh yeah, it was the first week of school, first week back to school. And I'm like, yeah, go ahead. I got this. I'm like, oh. Then I'm in the middle of it. I'm like, what the heck was I thinking? So we won't go down the gender stereotypes but I think men and women are primed differently, right? In that respect, for they are more trained by society to seek what they need. And as women, we're more trained by society to seek, what do other people need to be okay? And I was definitely in that mode.
Yeah. And I think what's really interesting is when you talk about having a breakdown in September, it's not that something particular happened to cause the breakdown. It was more a lack of things from how you've described it. So it's not always something external, terrible, trauma-like happening. It's just when we actually neglect these needs that can also lead to something severe.
And it's a buildup inside. Like, I do some of the coaching work I do is somatic, right? Is embodiment. It works with the body. And some of the mentors in that field will tell you that your issues are in your tissues.
Yes.
Like your body holds the trauma. And not that, and this is a very light use of the word trauma, but it holds the emotions that you're not paying attention to. And I think sometimes what I do is I think to ask myself, what do I need? But that's not the question I'm answering. I'm answering like, what do I need to do? So I end up doing something. I'm like, what do I need to do? Okay, I need to focus on this kind of work. What else do I need to do? So if I ask my head to give me the answer, What do I need? It comes up with, what do I need to do? And it's answering the shoulds and coulds and very practical, action-oriented things. But if I had stopped and asked my body, actually, if I had just stopped, if I had slowed down enough to feel in, I probably would have come in contact with the sadness that was there. At the missing of my family, at the missing of, tradition, at the missing of the ocean or whatever. But I mean, I do recognize you asked me what that week brought to me. Let me just say, when I was there, when you get that time and space away, if you can carve yourself out, right? I planned it for a specific week because there was a conference on. It was an embodiment conference online. It was an international conference. So it was running online sessions round the clock. And I'm like, I'm going away that week so I can stay up all night if I want to see a juicy session at 3 a.m. And I can sleep in all morning if I want to. So I had the freedom. I had flexibility. I had nobody else's needs to take care of but my own. And so it was freeing. It was fulfilling. And it, in some ways, hard because you're suddenly alone with yourself, which is perhaps what I was avoiding the whole summer.
Yeah. And a lot of people would find that very disconcerting and disorientating to be alone with themselves. I actually really like being alone by myself.
Well done.
But I know a lot of women who would do anything other than be alone with themselves. But it's important, don't you think, to be comfortable?
Yes, absolutely. And because that's where the answers are. And I think especially as women, as we're talking about that, right? We're so primed to get our answers about what to do and what we need from external sources. When if we sat alone with ourselves and listened inward, we would find the answers of what we truly need speaking to us, but they speak in whispers from within. So I can be alone with myself. I'm alone with myself in my office all day, but I'm alone with myself, but I'm not sitting in stillness, listening into the whispers.
Yeah, that's very different. And how do you do that? You talked about listening to your body and tuning in. How do you actually go about doing that?
The first thing I need to do is stop moving, right? So stop the movement, slow down the breathing, right? Your more traditional, I guess, calming techniques. Mm-hmm. But for me, it's if I can just stop being in movement, slow down my breath, then I need to, I don't need to shut the voices off in my head. I think people really worry about that. Oh, I can't meditate. I can't, clear my head of all thoughts. I don't even worry about trying to clear my head of all thoughts. I just try to redirect my attention into the physical sensations in my body. There's always some sort of tightness or a clenching or tension somewhere, right? Is it your jaw? Is it your neck and shoulders? When I'm in overwhelm and anxiety, it's often a weight on my chest. If I'm nervous or excited, it's, kind of those butterflies in your stomach. Maybe it's just tension in your lower, we forget about the whole lower half of our body. So very often my knees are tight, my thighs are clenching, and just relaxing everything and feeling into where do I feel the sensation? And then asking myself, when I feel that sensation, what does it remind me of? What is that emotion? What is the emotion that is connecting to? And when I know the emotion, this is the coaching head, right? Once I know the emotion, I know emotions are hugely knowledgeable, right? They have so much information in them. Sadness tells me about loss. There's something I lost that was important to me. Anger tells me about either resentment or some sort of injustice. Something is I don't feel is just, right? Fear tells me that I'm projecting into the future and I'm worried about something happening that hasn't even occurred yet. So each of these emotions are informative. And if I can get in touch, we tend to know, you don't have to be a somatic coach to know this. If you can just say, I feel tightness here. When do I feel that tightness? Well, I felt it when I was about to give a presentation. Oh, what was that about? I felt it before when I was doing this. You connect the dots and you start knowing that this body sensation means this emotion.
Yeah. I remember waking up once and not being able to move my neck at all. And it literally was a pain in the neck. Like I knew immediately something had really, really hacked me off the day before. And it actually made me smile that I had literally seen it as a pain in the neck. And that was how it was manifesting. So
yeah. See, so sometimes it's quite obvious. The body sometimes makes it easy for us.
Yeah. The body's just amazing, isn't it? I never cease to be amazed at how sophisticated the whole thing is.
Absolutely.
So when you came back to your home, to your family, did you find that you had more resources, internally to deal with day-to-day stuff?
Yes. It was a total reset, right? And this is what we talk about. And you mentioned Grounded Parents Group, and I know we'll talk about that later if you want to. But in Grounded Parents Group, when we're working with parents, we talk about this need to estimate what our capacity is. Where is our capacity at? And at any given time, we may only, think about it as a full tank or an empty tank, right? And I don't know which way you wanna think about it. But when we think about capacity, I needed to have the capacity to be present with my family, and I didn't have any more capacity, right? Like my cup was full, and not in the good way. The tank was full, but not in the good. Like it was. You know what it reminds me of? I'm going to use this analogy. We have a little puppy that just came into the house. We have a trainer who comes to teach us about the puppy, and she says, puppies have a bucket, and it fills up very quickly. You do a little bit of training with it, half hour. Their bucket is filled. She's like, after that, they're going to start acting out. You're not going to get any good behavior out of them. You're not going to get any more training done. You need to empty their bucket before they're going to calm down again and be available to you again. I'm like, oh, interesting. So what are the things we do to empty the puppy's bucket, right? And then she told us, this kind of a sniffing activity or this kind of licking activity, those help empty the puppy's bucket. And I'm like, that's it. That's me. My bucket was full. Yeah. My bucket was full and I needed to go empty the bucket so I could have capacity to give to family, to be present for family, to be emotionally available for their emotions.
Yeah, because of course we can be physically there, physically clanging around the kitchen, putting dinner on the table. So ostensibly available and doing the whole mum job, but actually inwardly just had it and just actually feeling quite resentful of the whole thing because it's just too much. Yes,
that's it. You make a great point, Susie. It's not the physical presence, right? That's I think our minimum. Can I show up? Can I physically get into the room? Look, on some days, if that's all we have to give is to physically show up, I don't want to take that away from anybody. Like that might be it. But when we say, okay, it's great, I managed that, but that's not where I want to live. I don't want to be like that. I really want to be emotionally and psychologically present for my family members also. That requires a very different level of energy management that has to happen during your days, over the course of several days. And you need to be engaging in these self-care practices. All of the guests on your show, Susie, are bringing to your audience amazing ways that they can engage in well-being and take care of themselves.
Yeah.
That's why we do it, to build capacity.
Exactly. And it took me so long, Terri, to figure this out. I didn't actually even figure it out. I learned it from other people. But this concept of energy management, because you can't see the energy, can you? So it's just this very intangible concept. And on everything else, you get into your car, you can see the petrol gauge, but this energy gauge, unless we actually stop and take notice of it and try to get in touch with it, I know for me, I was just running on fumes for so long but ostensibly looking fine. You know, I was clean and you know, doing my job, but I really was running on fumes because I didn't understand this concept of self-care. And I actually thought it was quite indulgent, really,
Yeah.
which a lot of women think.
These are the myths. These are the myths of self-care, right? That one, I'm only going to be successful and move forward through hard work, pushing on, endurance, persistence. I mean, these all seem like great words. And I think we're, you know, if you're raised much like I was, you know, to be a strong, independent woman, you lean into that and you think this is the way to go. This is the key to success, right? So, you know, critical thinking, self-criticism, hard work, that's the key to success. And so we think if I dare to slow down and take care of myself, like that's a slippery slope, then I'm just going to become a sloth, you know, which by the way, it's happened to nobody ever, right? If you are overworking yourself, the chances that you're going to suddenly flip the switch and turn into, you know, a couch potato, unlikely. I dare you to try. That's what I challenge people.
It's so true. You really don't see that happening, do you? Yeah,
No.
that's a very good point.
Yeah. And I think, you know, there's another belief that if I'm engaging in self-care, that I'm selfish. And this may be where the different gender lines play a role. I don't know if when men, you know, go after what they want or take care of what they need, if they're viewed as selfish or ambitious, right? But, you know, I think women kind of get this from a young age that we're meant to be or should be somehow, you know, nurturing and caring for others. And that, and it's also modeled over the years. I know my mom sacrificed so much for me and my sister. Yeah. And if you witness that, you think that's how I should be. And so I think maybe it's weak, or I'm not being a good mom, or it's just, it's self-indulgent.
Yes, absolutely. It reminds me of a lady I once coached who was in exactly that position that you just talked about. And we were doing tapping together, EFT, one day, and she suddenly remembered when she was around 4 or 5 years old, her mother used to read her a bedtime story, and it was, you know, the book where it's Monday's child is this, Tuesday's child is that. And yes. I can't remember which day of the week she was, but it was Thursday or whatever, is full of kindness. And she had imbibed from that book, from being a Thursday child, whatever day it was, that she must be somebody who was defined by this quality of kindness. And she grew up and she became a nurse. And her whole day, her whole years, her life was driven by just to do kindnesses to other people. And I had to work with her to even do something like, one week she came in to see me and she said, I want to tell you that I pulled out a piece of paper from my drawer and I went to have a smear test, because she just shoved it in a drawer because that was something for her to have a smear test. That's how she saw it, that was almost an indulgence, because that was not to do with other people. So she hadn't even gone for a smear test. So that was real progress for her to come and say, I got the piece of paper out and I called and I made an appointment to have a smear test. So we're not even talking about treating yourself to a massage or a manicure. It's actually going to something as basic as you know, not getting, God forbid, ovarian cancer, whatever it is, cervical cancer. I mean, it's basic healthcare. Yeah.
It's not even.
So there's a real problem.
Self-care. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's not even just. Yeah. And I recall another lady who was coaching recently who had the same sort of mindset. I mean, I see it all the time, and she said, if I were to drop one thing that I am doing for everyone else, you know, if I were to do one thing for myself, I would have to drop something I'm doing for someone else in my family. And that is inconceivable. And I think that is the mindset. If you're juggling all these things for every member in your family on your shoulders, it seems to people inconceivable that you would actually do something for yourself.
Yeah, you're right. And you hear about these parents, these moms who are cooking dinner for the family, and they make the whole family a meal, and they find themselves standing at the counter. They've completely forgotten to feed themselves. Like they haven't made themselves a meal. They've cooked for everybody else, and they just sat everybody else's table setting and not their own. It's really can be deep. And the juggling analogy, I want to speak to that because I hear this a lot. A lot of my coachees also like, I'm juggling so many balls. And I'm like, yes, but it's, they're like, I just don't know. Actually, what they do is they come in and they say, I don't know how to balance everything. Mm-hmm. I don't know how to balance, my needs and everybody else's needs, or work and life, or whatever it is they're balancing. I'm like, it's never going to be in balance. You never get to the balance. It's always, a shifting of, what you're doing now versus what you're doing then. So it is a little bit more of a juggle, and you're juggling a lot of balls. And all you need to do is figure out which one of those balls are the glass balls that you really can't drop. And you need to be okay to figure out which ones are rubber. They can bounce a little. You can set them down, and you can pick them back up later.
So give us an example there, Terri. What are your glass balls?
My glass balls. So, I would say one of them should be me. And I think this is what happened and why I broke. I dropped it. I dropped that ball. So one should be me, right? One is definitely, one of my core values is connection. Mm-hmm. So that means finding time to connect with family and friends. And one of my other ones is integrity. So, doing what's right over what's fast, fun, or easy. So that really leads me into doing my purpose, my life's work, right? So my glass balls are my key responsibilities at work. And of course, those should shift also. They're not all equally important at once. My family and me. And and now that we bring this analogy to it, you make me realize that is exactly what happened to me. I dropped my own ball.
Wow. Yeah, that's really profound, isn't it? I dropped my own ball and I cracked. Yeah. Yeah, gosh. So tell us about your life's work, because you have come originally from a background in was it genetics and biology?
Yeah.
Originally?
Originally it was a career in genetics. Yeah.
Yeah. And so tell us about your journey to what you do now.
Yeah. So, I was working with families who had genetic conditions way back when. That was my original career. As an American who moved to Switzerland with my husband, we moved for his career in the pharmaceutical industry. It caused me to make a shift, right, in what I was doing. And, being able to serve families in another language, it just really wasn't possible. And also my licensure wasn't the same from the US to Switzerland. So I had a career change during that time. And that got me into the pharmaceutical industry. I still work remotely in genetics, right? So they had a genetic research group in the pharmaceutical company. And I started working with their leadership team, doing internal communications and strategy. And that corporate work with leaders sparked something in me, right? At first, I was doing it just as, okay, this is what I can do, biding time to stay on in the workforce. But over time, it really reconnected me with what I was passionate about was authentic leadership, right? I saw some really great leadership. I saw some really bad leadership. And I thought, I want to build more authentic leaders. So that caused me to retrain and become a coach. And that's what I'm doing now. So I'm doing executive coaching and leadership development on one side, so in the corporate world, but I'm also developing leaders in the parenting world. And
that's a really interesting concept, because I don't think parents would necessarily see themselves as leaders. And tell us, why do you see those parallels? Why parents as leaders?
I think when you just say it, parents are leaders. And if you ask a parent, are you a leader? They would probably say, No. And some parents might even say, no, I work in the home. I don't even hold a job for a company. And they associate leadership with working for a job in a company or having a team. But the fact is, leadership is anytime you're looking and you're responsible for the potential, finding the potential in other people and moving that potential forward and nurturing that potential. And that is parenting.
Yeah. And that's very different from controlling them. So I noticed you said in moving their potential along.
Yes.
So it's a very particular type of leadership. It's not the autocratic, traditional, conventional leadership that you're talking about. Like, what is your understanding of leadership, particularly in the home?
Leadership in the home to me looks like really having a parent see themselves as a leader allows them to separate, right? Because I think when we see ourselves as a parent, the word parent means I am responsible for this being. It is my job to do for them and to nurture them, to instill morals and values in them, and to get them out into the world as a successful member of society. And that is a very push type of leadership, right? Like I'm doing for them. If we put a leadership hat on, and the type of authentic leadership that I try to build in organizations, and you look at that in a parent, you say, okay, can you build a team? What would it mean to build a team? Who do you need on your team? What are the skills each team member has? What do they bring to the team? And where can they contribute to the functioning of that team? So we have meetings. We have family meetings, right? And, we call it, the Creeden family meeting. And we sit down and it's got an agenda, but we don't sit there with a piece of paper in front of us. But it starts with going around. Okay, we start with compliments and appreciations. Everybody gives a compliment or an appreciation to everybody else at the table. We talk about the upcoming week, like who's got what going on, so we know who's where when. So the logistics. Any questions or problems or concerns. The kids usually have none. Parents, we usually have many. We usually say, okay, I have a concern. The dishwasher was your responsibility. It's not getting done. Can we address that? And then we end with some sort of, a meal, a game, something fun, right? So team building.
Yeah.
And this came out of the positive parenting world that I adopted that. But where I first made this link, parenting and leaders, actually was when I was doing leadership development training, and all of the leaders in organizations that I was training were taking the skills we were teaching them around active listening, empathy, giving and receiving feedback. And they were trying it at home with their families first. They're like, I tried it with my teenage son. It worked great. I'm like, oh, great. Tell me about that. I mean, it was happening over and over again. I'm like, okay. There's a couple reasons people do that. It's safe at home to try out something new, with people who love you. So if you're trying out a new way of being, that's safe. But it made me realize that every time I was in these leadership development programs, people were drawing parallels. They're like, that happens with my kids. I'm like, yes, it is the same. So leadership in organizations they were making all these links to parenting. Then I started saying, wait, parenting is leadership. And guess what? Here I am in a room developing all of these leaders to be better leaders. But all of the parents who are at home have no development opportunities. Who's developing parents in their leadership role? And that's where Grounded Parents Group started. Yeah.
And isn't that just the most important leadership role that you could ever think of?
Yeah. For me, it is. And I think for a lot of us, if you choose to step into the shoes of a leader and you think, what is my purpose in doing this? Mm-hmm. Why have I chosen to take on the power and responsibility of any leadership role? As a parent, you want to nurture somebody to live their fullest version of themselves. That's the potential.
Yeah.
Right. And to then be a productive member of society.
Yeah. It's interesting that when I think about the word leader, it's very, very far from a lot of the mothers who I coach, and the dads as well, in fact, who feel like they've almost lost control of particularly their teenagers. And I see a lot of mums who I would say are actually even quite scared of their teenagers. Often the mothers are physically smaller than the teenagers. And when it
Yes.
comes to a subject such as phone use at night, a lot of parents I coach have simply given up. They've simply washed their hands of the whole thing. So they are aware that their child at age 10, 11, 12, 13 is on the phone until 5 o'clock in the morning sometimes, or very often it's kind of midnight or 1, but I've seen it up until 5 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
But they've kind of it's kind of like, what can I do? They're not going to listen to me. There's nothing I can do. And I just wonder how you would go about approaching something like that, because the phone use is an issue for so many parents who don't want to come across as bullying, or they just, maybe they've tried to take the phone away, but then the teenager got stroppy and it all ended up in a huge row. And so it was just easier to let the phone be in the teenager's room and just, just wash your hands really of it.
Yeah. I, as you're talking, I'm struggling to not just fall right into a big shame storm about a conversation I had with my son the other night. Yes. This is, I think, okay, the struggle of our time for our parents is how do I get them outside to play and off of the television, and, whatever the generational struggle is for technology. I should say the work I do is less about the parenting and really strongly focused on the parent. And so how I would approach that situation is to work with the mom or dad on, what is coming up for them in that moment, right? To say that, I've lost control of my teenager, and to which we might explore whether or not they actually ever had control, or how much it was costing them to try to control them, because you just can't. And I get why we think that, because when they're little, we more or less can control them, right? When they're babies, from when they come into our world, we can pick them up and we can take them somewhere, and we more or less can control them. But there's parts of those even babies that we're not in control of, whether they sleep or not, when they want to sleep, when they get hungry, things like that. There are parts that, so I would probably explore the concept of control and the discomfort that individual leader, parent, feels when they are not in control, and how to approach it instead, where you have to lean into a fair amount of vulnerability there, meaning some level of risk and uncertainty, and lean into probably what's going to be an uncomfortable, bumpy, not quite perfect conversation, probably more than one conversation with your child about what they think about phone use, what they're getting out of it, what they're not, what you know about it. And to the extent you can, you are the parent to set boundaries.
Yeah.
Like,
I think
what's okay with me and what's not.
Yeah, I think this is what I see a lot, is a complete absence of anything approaching a boundary. And what I always think is that kids, they want to know who's flying the plane. They don't really want to be just left with no one in charge. And when I've worked with the families where there was the phone use, the kids wanted, they wanted someone to take the phone off them at 10 o'clock because they weren't happy, but they needed the parent to be a parent. And I think what we're seeing now is maybe an erosion of that kind of setup.
I think you hit the nail on the head, Susie. The erosion, that's a great word. I think we have seen that. And what I love that's coming up is so timely. Last night on our, in our parenting program, we were doing the topic of boundaries. We were talking about that. And it was such a juicy conversation, because all of us parents struggle with how to set them, when to set them. Well, why set them if they're going to be crossed? And can I set a boundary that I can't uphold? And there's so many big questions around it. But the fact is, we use this analogy, like, not setting boundaries in parenting is like letting your kids run across a bridge without any guardrails.
Yeah.
Right? They may resist the guardrails. They may want to run wild left and right and swing from the chandeliers. But the fact is, they won't feel safe.
Yes.
And they won't be safe. And so our job is to provide these guardrails, and to recognize that when we set a boundary, there's going to be resistance.
And
right?
that's okay. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it.
Right. And expect it. I think you need to go in
Yes.
expecting it, that setting a boundary. This was the other quote we brought up, like setting a boundary and having it met with resistance doesn't mean you shouldn't have set the boundary. It means the boundary was needed in the first place.
I'm going to ask you to say that again because it's so important.
When we set a boundary, if it's met with resistance, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't have set the boundary. It means that the boundary was needed in the first place. So the resistance is evidence that you're doing the right thing.
I think every parent listening will appreciate you saying that. Because that is just so fundamental to a happy home, isn't it? Yeah. The boundaries are part of a functional relationships.
Yeah, and I think you need to take happy with a big broad swipe, a happy home, like over time. Yeah. In that moment, it may not feel happy. It's going to feel really vulnerable to lean in and set that boundary, to set a hard rule, all phones outside the room. And it might mean yours too. It's going to maybe be not pleasant in the moment, but I think that's what happens when you set boundaries. What you're choosing is, a few minutes of discomfort for avoiding a lifetime of resentment. Yeah.
It reminds me, just while I was listening to you there, Terri, of a time when my oldest son, Max, he's now 22. So he was around 10 at the time. And all of his friends had a DS, which was the electronic toy of the time.
Oh, yeah.
And they were taking it on the school bus. And I just thought this was a bit much. They cost about £100. And I just thought, this is ridiculous. It got to the point where Max was actually, where his friends were like saying, where's your DS? And he was saying, oh, it's at home. He was actually sort of trying to cover up the fact that he didn't have one.
Yeah.
And it got to the point where I remember talking to his teacher about it. And she was very kind of, do you know what? This is a child who likes to read. Don't give in. But I did. I was like, Max, sweetheart, I don't want you to be the only one. I'm going to buy you one. But what I do remember is about a year later, he thanked me. He said, do you know what, Mummy? If you would have bought me whatever it was, I would have ended up playing on it all day long. And I'm so grateful that you didn't kind of go along with everyone else. So often it can be a delayed thank you. Often you never get a thank you, but it doesn't mean that it wasn't a positive intervention.
Yes, exactly. And wow, what a gift you got, a thank you or a recognition that it was the right choice. And that's so validating as a parent. We so rarely get those.
Yes.
But, I think that's backed up. It's backed up by research, exactly what you're pointing to. So a lot of the research that we bring into our work is from Brené Brown, who's a social researcher, and she studies shame and vulnerability and courage and bravery in our life and
she's
all these
amazing.
wonderful concepts.
She has a fabulous TED Talk if anybody wants to look there.
Yes, TED Talk on vulnerability. That's definitely the right place to begin diving into Brené Brown. But what she talks about in her research in her book, Daring Greatly, is that they were at one point talking to, I think it was a bunch of middle schoolers about, parents and boundaries and things like that. And suddenly the conversation started digressing to this like competition, like who had the most strict parents. Well, my parents wouldn't let me watch TV. My parents didn't even have a TV, right? And it was a competition. And somehow there was this vibe, like the more strict your parents were, like they were kind of viewing it as like the worse off you were, but there was this impression that it was equated with love, like, but your parents, you had so much attention from them because of that, because there was always a subset of kids in that research group who became very, very withdrawn and sad and said, we didn't have any boundaries in our house. We could do whatever we wanted. I had no curfew. Nobody paid attention to when I came home. And there was such sadness that got triggered in those kids that they actually stopped asking the question in the research.
Oh, gosh.
Speaking of somatics, right? I have like tingles all down my spine from just thinking about that.
Yeah.
That the kids, they don't know it. They don't, I mean, we recognize this. They don't know what they need.
They don't know what they need. That's so true. How could they?
Right.
Yeah.
And
yet so many parents are scared because, what if he kicks off and he shouts, and that would be horrible? Or what if he doesn't like me? What if she, and what if she says, but all my friends are allowed X, Y, Z and you're really mean? And that seems an intolerable thing to happen to the parents. So they would rather not experience that.
Yes, exactly. And so, what came out of our work last night? We were online and we did a quick survey. Like, okay, tell us what happens when you think about setting a boundary. What stops you? And they were worried about exactly that.
Yeah.
That we're going to get in a fight. They're not going to respect me. They're not going to like me. They're not going to adhere to the boundary. Mm-hmm. So in general, there was just like, I'm fearing some disconnection. I want to stay close to my child. I want there to be a bond. So they feared disconnection. Mm-hmm. So, they didn't set boundaries. And then we said, okay, when you don't set boundaries, then what happens? We end up in anger. I'm resentful. The relationship starts to deteriorate. I get more and more frustrated. I withdraw from them. So what happens is we don't set the boundary because we're afraid that we'll experience some disconnection. But when we don't set the boundary, that's exactly what we get, disconnection.
Yeah.
So we set boundaries not to draw a line and start a fight. We set boundaries to preserve the relationship. And when you communicate it that way, to say, look, I realize that this is going to be a hard choice for you to make to get off the phone at 10. So I'm going to help you make it. But you've got to make it, because if you don't, mm-hmm. you're gonna feel bad the next day. I'm going to be angry the next day. And I don't want us to interact with each other like that.
And that's a very respectful, empathetic way that is treating the child as somebody who's mature and able to understand. It's very different from, I was on your phone, I'm going to take away your bloody phone, and smashing it against a wall, which you do see happen.
This is exactly where leaning in, those leadership conversations come in, because a daring leader, daring parent, mm-hmm. will lean into the discomfort of having a hard, open, empathetic conversation. It is much easier to just let the anger fly, to go in, rip the phone out of their hands and say, that's it, it's mine for the next week, and slam the door on your way out. Right? It feels good too.
Yeah. And then you have a really angry teenager,
absolutely,
who really won't want to talk to you. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know what? You don't feel good either. You feel good for the second you slam the door. And the minute that you're on the other side of that door, you're like, oh, like that's not, nobody wants to show up as that parent. Nobody wants to be that parent. So it is finding the courage to lean into that discomfort and the uncertainty of how this conversation is going to go, but I'm going to stumble my way through it and just lay it all out there and say, I don't want us to be angry with each other.
Yeah.
I want you to be able to have this phone. That's okay with me, but I need you to get off it by X time.
Yeah. And I think when I've seen people actually do that, when I've kind of, with a bit of coaching and support, the relief that they feel afterwards, and they'll often come and say, Susie, you wouldn't believe it, but actually it went fine. I was terrified, but actually it was fine. And they were quite okay with it. Yeah. So I think sometimes we build things up in our head that it's going to be this horrendous catastrophe and the kids are going to walk out. But dealt with in a mature way, respectful, as you have just beautifully modeled. But to do that, to do what you just described, you need your tank to be full of energy, don't you?
Yes.
You really, so it
need
comes
to
back to
have the
your earlier
capacity.
point. You need to have the capacity.
That's it. That's it, full circle, Susie. You need to have the capacity, because if I'm, if I've been storing up all my sadness and doubt and emotions inside me and not finding space for them and numbing them with whatever your numbing agent of choice is, eating, drinking, for me, it's work and doing, whatever keeps you from looking at and feeling the emotions inside, right? Like if you've been storing that all up, when it comes time and you see that phone still on, the glow under the door at midnight, you're like,
yeah,
the mommy monster comes out, and you can't cope then.
Yeah, that's it. You just, at that point, you just lost it, and nothing good is going to come out of that, once the red mist comes down.
Exactly.
So, wow. Honestly, Terri, I could chat to you all day. But so just to kind of bring this to a close, I'm conscious of time. There's so much else I want to ask you. What can parents start to do if they feel a little bit intrigued by what you've talked about, and they recognize perhaps that they have found themselves in that feeling of powerlessness, of having discarded any sort of boundary, and just feeling like, oof, what would be a good thing for them to start to change themselves in order to change the dynamic at home?
Yeah, the first step to any behavior change is self-awareness. You first have to see it happening. You have to recognize what you're doing, right?
Yeah.
And you heard in my story over the summer that I wasn't always necessarily aware in that moment. But once I became aware, I've done enough self-work that I recognized what had happened to me in retrospect. So let's be clear. Self-awareness doesn't mean you're always going to get it right. It means that when you're getting it wrong, you're going to realize it. You're going to see it for what it is. So recognizing what is important to you. This is self-awareness, right? What is important to me? What do I need? How do my emotions show up in me? How are they dictating my behaviors? Because what we're talking about, this losing it, right? This is getting triggered or being overreactive, right? Nobody wants to lose it. And so you can't stop that reaction, that automatic reaction, until you are well aware of what's driving it in the first place. So the first thing is self-awareness, which I would say, I hear you saying that you're coaching moms and dads, connect with a coach. And if you don't have the time and or resources, or you don't quite know yet where to find a coach who's right for you, then start with a BFF, your friend, right? Start talking to them. And because there's nothing harder in parenting than feeling like you're alone and you're in isolation.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's so true. I would be in such a mess without my friends.
Right? Wouldn't we all?
Yeah. So tell us, just to end off, Terri, a little bit about Grounded Parents and how people can find you and what sort of work that you do with people.
Yeah, and I think you've heard a little bit about, through the course of our conversation, what we do. We're all about bringing that self-awareness to parents. Mm-hmm. We are the place where the parents can come and focus on them. Who am I as a person? And how am I showing up in my parenting? And can I become the parent I've always wanted to be? So again, Grounded Parents Group, we're not about the parenting. We don't tell people how to parent. We help them become the parent that they always wanted to be by honing these leadership skills, leaning into hard conversations, gaining the self-awareness about what are the fears and expectations that are driving these automatic reactions and causing us to blow up. And so, how to work with us, of course, we have a website, right? groundedparents.group is where you go to. We have programs that we're running. They're research-based, based on the research of Dr. Brené Brown. Mm-hmm. And they're really meant to bring parents into a more daring, authentic parenting space and how to be resilient and bounce back from the setbacks that parents inevitably face. Yeah. So that's where you can find us. And for the really fun part, to stay connected on a quick basis, definitely find us on Instagram at Grounded Parents Group, because we're posting a lot of inspirational stuff and quick things to help build capacity and refill your tank on a daily basis.
Yeah. I want to thank you so much, Terri. I've just loved talking to you so much. And I know that I'm going to go away and think about everything that you said. And I hope that everyone else will as well. I'm sure they've found it as insightful as I have. So thank you so much. And I just look forward to following all your work and hope that you just send out a ripple effect of helping parents around the world to look after themselves, so that we can bring up the next generation of resilient young people.
Absolutely. I'm all for that, Susie. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Take care. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.